Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Hello, ray of sunshine.
Aww. Pete's after my heart getting me up early to do this every Thursday. Okay.
Well, it's easy to get up every Thursday when you have a superstar like Jessica on, Dr. Marie.
Yeah. So do you want to start by telling us about your superstar status according to Mary Tracy? Hi, Mary.
Mary Tracy. Wait, Jessica knows Mary Tracy too?
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Oh, here's our other superstar.
Hello.
The dog, of course. The puppy.
Yeah, he wants to go out, but
That's all right. So do I.
I'm occupied, so.
Okay. We were just asking Jessica to share her superstar status and giving a shout out to Mary Tracy, who connected us all together.
That's very.
Well, there you go. So,
Hi, Jay.
Hey. So, we've actually known each other for quite a few years, and before Mary Tracy necessarily connected us, and we actually appear in the book The Electric Brain by R. Douglas Fields together. She recorded the EEG that I analyzed and went over with him. He had a low voltage fast EEG. And in the book, there's a wonderful section where he actually has an internal dialogue while he's doing his neurofeedback. And, the busy brain, and no scoring, no benefit, and he does a few epochs of training with no benefit at all, really, and they're ready to finish it. And he says, one more time, and that time he goes and just lets go like an underwater swimmer, just drifting, and a little Caribbean music in his head, and then boom, suddenly the session is over. Instead of a long dialogue, he actually had the experience and let go. So anyway, the book is really quite good, and I think it does a wonderful job kind of presenting the experience of the evaluation and the training and all of that with Jessica and your partner out there. And thanks for involving me in it. I mean, you don't, I wasn't there, so you had to kind of set it out to me. But it was fun going over it with him, and he sent me a nice copy of his book, so that was always nice. And if people haven't actually read that book, you should. It has a fabulous treatment of the very beginning of EEG, an honest evaluation of the beginning of the EEG, including not attempting to cover over the Nazi nature of Berger, which a lot of people have tried. And then, the experience of neurofeedback and going on to modern brain-computer interface to finish it off. So from the beginning to the kind of the future of EEG as the electric brain. So it's a very good book.
Wonderful. What year did that come out, Jay or Jessica?
It wasn't that long ago.
It came out in early 2020.
Okay.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Cool.
So, and, R. Douglas Fields is not a small figure in neuroscience, and he wrote The Other Brain about white matter which is also a very, very well done book. Not everybody can make white matter an interesting topic for an entire book, but he really weaves it together nicely with personal story and the pursuit of the science of it. He does a very nice job as an author, and he's NIMH. I mean, he's not just a science nerd who's writing. He's actually really extremely he's overqualified, if anything. So
Speaking of qualifications, Jessica, why don't you share a little bit about yourself? How did you get involved in the book? Any other thing? Who are you, madame?
Oh, well, thank you. I am a mental health counselor, LPC here in Virginia, and I specialize in quantitative EEG guided neurofeedback in my practice. I've been full-time in practice since 2007. That's when I graduated from the University of Virginia with my master's in counseling. And I had actually gone back to do my master's specifically so that I could get a license and get malpractice insurance to offer neurofeedback. So
There's an idea.
Person first and a counselor second. I first started dabbling 20 years ago. This year is the first time I got an EEG and started dabbling. And I'd actually run across it initially while I was in undergraduate school. I was in an honors program where we had to write a thesis in undergrad, and I wrote my thesis on REM sleep. And at the time, I really wanted the thesis to be about Jungian dream analysis and transpersonal kind of theories. And but I challenged myself by asking the physiological psych professor to be my mentor on that paper as a kind of foil against what I was going to be writing about. And I never got past the physiological part. I never even touched on anything else because it was so fascinating to me. And just learning about why we actually have REM and the theories around that turned out to be fascinating. So I ran across Richard J. Davidson's work. And then that kind of led me into the neurofeedback world a little bit. But I didn't do anything with it at that time. I got a job right out of undergrad at a private psychiatric hospital. It was a 40-bed acute care, straight from the emergency room, homicidal, suicidal, psychotic populations. And
good intro.
That was my first job in mental health. And I was a mental health associate, which is, I guess, the modern word for an orderly. So I was getting to observe the nurse meetings. I was watching the amount of polypharmacy that was happening. I was observing electroconvulsive therapy. I was noticing that they were doing that a lot on elderly, depressed people who weren't taking care of themselves. They would just bring them in from homes sometime, zap them, send them back, and they'd perk up for a little while. And then they would do that again. And I was really starting to question how I wanted to be involved in the mental health field at all. And that was a great hospital too. I'm not talking bad about it. It was a Mennonite run hospital. A lot of Mennonites started hospitals as their alternative service during the war. And so this was one of those. You couldn't tell. They didn't proselytize at all, but the whole board of directors were Mennonites, and they were very ethical. It was a really nice hospital, but I just wasn't sure how I fit in. And so I started researching alternatives to electroconvulsive therapy. And again, there was neurofeedback, and I was interested again, and moved to Charlottesville in 2003 and just cold called. I looked in wherever, I don't even remember at that point, was it the internet or a phone book, actually looked for somebody offering neurofeedback in my area, and cold called Robin Bernhard, who is a social worker in private practice, and said, "Hey, you should hire me as a neurofeedback technician." And we've been business partners ever since.
Wonderful.
How did you connect with our buddy Mary Tracy?
I first met Mary when I went to the Suisun Summit two years ago. Yeah. And then I took her quantitative EEG course, and that's when I really got to know her more. So I haven't known Mary nearly as long as I've known Jay. I've known Jay for about 10 years at least.
I I wouldn't say, because it's not nice to give a woman's age, So
Should I
we've
get
we've
political
known each
here
other
again?
we've known each other long enough to be good friends, So
You were at Suisun City. Uh, we must have run into each other there. That was the very first one, I think, wasn't it, Jay?
No.
no. It was the
No,
first one you made it to, Pete, but
ah,
there it grew up. That there were a couple of very small meetings. The hotel had a room that might hold 30. First time we might have had 20, 25 in it, and the second time we flooded the room and it was too tight. So after that, we found the yacht club for an expanded, and I think we might have done that a year before you were there. So
got it. Okay.
anyway, it's an ongoing thing. We actually made it into the local newspaper. Brainiacs of the world descend on Suisun City, it was actually pretty good coverage for a little, tiny newspaper. We got a lot of inches. Uh,
Hell of a birthday party.
You know, if you're going to celebrate your birthday and you can't really get out at all, and I can't, I risk it once a year. And if I'm going to have a birthday party, if I can do it over 3 days, so much the better. And what's better than EEG, for me at least? It's a celebration of EEG and me making it another year, which is the long odds, really. So
Jessica, you brought up malpractice, and I don't know, my spider sense went off regarding neurofeedback. What uh, what are the negative consequences of neurofeedback? Because my limited knowledge of neurofeedback just deals with video editing, but I heard the worst thing that you can get from neurofeedback is a headache.
Wow, that's a loaded question. Well, I feel like anyone who's going to be offering these services should be a licensed professional, and that's the standard for the BCIA, the Certification Association, is unless you're a technician working under a licensed person, that to offer these services and get certified at the highest level, that you should be a licensed clinician so that you know how to you're properly trained to work with clients. So obviously that's just standard of practice, and there are reasons for that, not just to protect yourself from litigiousness, but to be able to be skilled at what we're doing. But yeah, I would maybe Mari or Jay want to speak to this too, but in terms of the danger or risk of neurofeedback, I think it's just very important for us to always disclose and talk with our clients openly before they even try neurofeedback, that we're bringing new blood flow to the cortex, and the microvasculature is being exercised or stretched in a way, and that sometimes that can cause some head pain or sensation that can be negative. Usually it's very temporary. So I always talk about that. And also I work particularly with traumatized people. And so people who have defenses, energetic defenses to protect themselves emotionally, and just to be in the world based on their experiences when they were children, typically, their brain works in a certain way. And so as we begin to help their brain to be more balanced, sometimes we're interacting with those kind of ways of being that used to be adaptive and now are maladaptive and causing symptoms. And when we begin to work with that system, we need to do it slowly and gently and always check in with the client and let them know they may experience things that initially may feel uncomfortable. Just being calm and relaxed for some people is so foreign that it feels negative initially. And so we need to work with our client so that they understand what they may experience and they can communicate to us, and we work at a pace that feels comfortable to them.
I'll really jump in here too, if you don't mind, just piggybacking in more accessible language what Jessica was saying. It's about perception. So I would say there is no quote unquote pain to the head, but humans naturally protect their brains and their necks, their brainstem all naturally, same way we protect our eyes, and one would say the gentlemen protect their genitals. There's just this automatic reaction of protection. So any variation whatsoever that is unknown can be perceived as whoa. So increased blood flow to the brain, unilaterally, almost unilaterally, I should say, is positive. It's just a matter of preparing the client for this. So when a client says, "Oh, I got a headache," it's a matter of reframing that. That's actually positive, but your brain sent a danger, a misinformed danger a signal. So once you let the brain know that, hey, this isn't dangerous, you don't get a headache again. The other, in terms of, what I call abreactions, they're defense mechanisms. Here I talk a lot about females and trauma, which Jessica was starting to say. If you have an individual where a state of quiet is the state in which they were abused, you have to walk into that state with the client, because they could potentially feel threatened. So that's where putting your therapist hat really goes on. I think the last comment I want to make, though, and this is the strongest comment, is we always tout about how magnificent and powerful our therapy is. It is. But we have to remember power goes both ways. And in the hands of unqualified, incompetent individuals, you can train a client in the wrong direction. It's like turning left instead of turning right. Whether how you set your thresholds, if you have them upside down. So I think those of us that are qualified really, really need to push anybody getting into the field. Study this, practice this, get it right. And
have consultants.
Yeah.
When you hang a shingle, you're not there by yourself. You have supervision and colleagues that you can consult with, or at least you should. And if you look to the historic literature, there's an 80-20. 80% of the time we have a positive benefit, and 20% of the time we didn't work well. Well, if 1 out of 5 people coming through your door are going back out the door without a positive effect, that's the group we need to really focus on. I mean, we're getting good outcomes on 80%, but the 20% we're not working well with, that's what we need to learn from. And they can be worked with. Now, online, there's actually a group talking about neurofeedback side effects. And there's a lot of horrible stories of negative outcome. Typically, if you hide out in the group and lurk around and listen for a long time, you'll find that it may have been done with a general health and wellness device, not with a therapist, but somebody who would rent you a device for you to use at home. And it was told that there's no negative outcomes, and that's a common statement out there on internet. No bad side effect. Well, if you have no side effect, you have no power. And Joe Lubar, bless his dearly departed heart, when he was doing research that went through IRB back then, he did in epilepsy an ABA design. And for those of you who don't understand the acronym, ABA design, you start training the brain in the right direction. The client is getting better. You switch, unbeknownst to the client, the protocol. They then have the wrong thing being trained, which, as Mari had mentioned, if you train the wrong thing, you get a bad outcome. The seizures are getting worse. They then reverse it back to the positive direction, and the client gets better again. Now, you can't get that through an IRB anymore. I mean, ultimately, it was a stupid thing for the IRB to approve in the first place. You can make somebody's seizures worse. You can die from a seizure, for God's sakes. So it was borderline nutty, foolish, but we were all there sometime. So it was done, but it was a powerful proof of the power, but also the possibility of error. If you do the wrong training, you can get a bad result. And there are people who don't really look at the brain activity before they jump in. They listen to the symptom, kind of like a DSM approach. I've got this complaint, and you categorize them one way, and you guess the therapy. Well, sometimes it's better to look before you leap. My grandmother was right. I think better to not dive into the water unless you know what's under the surface. And I haven't broke my neck diving in the water yet. So
I want to jump in with one more thing before we give the floor back to Jessica. Jessica, I warned you we would take over here. No, there's one particular program or device out there, and a few others. And sometimes I like to name it overtly, but essentially people take a workshop, they buy a very expensive device, call themselves a neurotherapist, and the results are 30% of people get better, 30% of individuals, nothing happens, and 30% get worse. Or a third, I mean. So essentially you have 66.666 individuals out there saying this made me worse or did nothing. That's extremely negative, and unfortunately they're right. So please, anybody new, do not get these what we call canned programs where you essentially put electrodes on or a hat on and press a button. It's not only not effective, it can be extremely dangerous. Any practice or piece of equipment, I should say, because a lot of people out here, let me do a lesson on meanings, a lexicon. If you use the word dynamic or nonlinear, or the practice does, or the equipment, what that is just fancy, flashy word for saying you do not look at the data. And I would say anybody who does not overtly look at the data, can't read the data, or does not have a supervisor or consultant who can look at the data is not only incompetent, they're potentially dangerous to the field and to their clients. I don't think that statement is too strong. Jessica and Jay, would you agree?
I think that the basic there is, if it's a general health and wellness device, you can't be using it for a therapeutic purpose. You can't treat something with a general health and wellness device.
Yeah.
It's not intended for that. It's not approved for that. Yeah. And if the manufacturer said you can treat hangnails with it, they would end up having the FDA bust them for making claims, therapeutic claims, for a general health and wellness device. So, they're very restricted as to what they can claim. However, people out there in the world make all sorts of claims for the same device. They're just not the manufacturer. And so you will see devices that are general health and wellness with people making claims. You have Crohn's disease. Well, Crohn's disease works really well with neurofeedback, and that's quite the claim. But you'll see that kind of stuff online.
Jessica, jump in. We'll take over if you don't.
Pete, can I share my screen real quick?
Go ahead.
Great. So to back that up, this is the first 200 QEEGs that I did that Dr. Proler reviewed. And I wanted to understand how many of them he was assessing as within the normal range of activity. WNR is within normal range. Of those 286, he was just saying this is within the normal range of expected activity for the age of the client. That's 43%, less than half of them. Now, this is a population with mental health diagnoses or complaints. This is not just, healthy people off the street. They're coming to my office with an issue. 22%, he would say this is within normal range, but he would either say it's within normal range, but it's slightly slow, or it's slightly low voltage, or it had some other note that he was just saying, hey, there's some spiky activity or something like this. And then 35% of those cases, he said were not within normal range. There was a significant finding called by a neurologist on 35% of the QEGs, the cases that I was working on. That's 35% of the people coming to my office that really may need a higher level of care or a referral out to a neurologist or someone other than me to get further blood testing, further neuroimaging, to find out what's really going on. Is there some other medical intervention that needs to occur either simultaneously or before we go forward with neurofeedback? This is really huge.
And Dr. Proler, when he passed, was one of the few people that had seen more EEGs than I had. And he knew what he was looking at. So, people just assume that if you're walking and talking that you're kind of generally okay, and there's a large percentage of the general population that have unique non-neurotypical findings, and some of them, those findings are something that should be treated to help optimize their performance or their how they're feeling or living. Epileptiform content being one of those. And as you probably look within that third that had abnormalities, there might have been a focal slow wave or epileptiform content or beta spindles, the kinds of odd findings that you run into. And those predict medication failure in psychiatry. If they go to a doctor and they don't look at the EEG, there's a high probability if you have unexpected epileptiform content, they're going to give you a psych med. Well, an antipsychotic is going to make you worse, not better. And stimulants without treating the discharge can make you worse, not better. Antidepressants can make you worse, not better. But if you're treating the discharge, now some of those other drugs will end up being effective as well. So psychiatry really isn't focused on the EEG. They're becoming more focused on the EEG.
Before Jay
Biological psychiatry is a growing aspect of the field of psychiatry. The rest of the field of psychiatry is shrinking. The APA meeting is a fraction of its historic size, but the biological psychiatry section is the one that's growing. So
before Jay goes into his very, very accurate, nice little slam of the DSM here, I also want to talk about the other side and throw in some epigenetics here. A lot of people are walking around with what we call liabilities, meaning, the brain is not typical, okay? But unless there's some kind of environmental trigger, I'm going to kind of air quote, these people are okay. And I think that's really important as well, when we talk about clinical databases, normative databases, how we choose an intervention, et cetera. One of the things I like to say is if there's no accompanying overt symptom, leave it alone. And that's, again, I'm just going to rotate back to epigenetics. If there's the alcohol will not light without a match. And so you can have people walking around with atypicalities and yeah, you don't necessarily want to go after them. Jessica, do you want to jump in, or Jay, do you want to jump in? That thought?
I'm already ready to jump in. You know me.
Well, you know,
Yes.
what came to my mind is, and I would love to know your guys' perspective on this. It's, I probably have seen at least 10, if not 15, young men, teens to mid 20s, who are presenting at my clinic, or their parents are bringing them to my clinic with some kind of derealization or some level of psychotic presentation that is precipitated by exposure to either some type of cannabis or other drug, psychedelics, and they can usually tell me the incident, the one time, oh, I did it this once and I've never felt the same again, and that it's really affected their life. And they've been struggling for years. They may have had to drop out of college. So thinking about epigenetics and something being kicked off, some gene expression being kicked off, and it worries me, because of the strength, especially of the pot now, and the ways that we're administering it, and that this is becoming more frequent. So
Don't get me going. I'll do the little soft intro, and then we'll go hardcore with Jay. You know, when I first got into this, I've got a few years on you there, Jessica. I think I've been strongly into neuro now for 25 years. Actually, yeah, more. Haha. You know, we would have one child every 3 years or so at the beginning, right? And you know, it was psychosis by marijuana use. It was extremely rare. But you're right. I mean, we're seeing this go up tenfold. The strength of the marijuana, and the acceptability of its use. And I think, just like many things, you know, now that marijuana is more popular, you know, many I'm gonna, you know, kids, youth, I would say, don't even consider marijuana a drug. But we have to get this information out. When I was a kid in high school, there was this movie called Reefer Madness, and we all used to laugh. It was absolutely extreme. It was this exaggeration, and it had exactly the opposite effect on marijuana use. It was just so absurd in terms of trying to portray all the evils. But strangely enough, it's kind of coming true. It's strangely predictive in terms of this psychosis. And I will be very transparent. We have not very good success once that's been triggered. I mean, we do have some success, but in terms of, you know, going fully backwards, you know, once that switch is clicked, it's clicked.
Yeah,
Jay, do you want to?
sure. The THC itself, on an acute basis, slows the background alpha slightly. And that's usually fairly well tolerated by people who want to like wind down and go to sleep and stuff. And like beer, slightly slowing the alpha, you have a socialization sort of a thing. That's not the chronic effect, however. Chronic exposure increases the frontal alpha coherence. And frontal alpha coherence is affect regulation. So if you have a predisposition towards a problem, and you increase the coherence up front, you may end up having an affective disorder present. But what we get nowadays isn't just THC. You have additives. So the percentage of cannabinoids goes way up. Um, Terpenates, the derivatives that have come out of processing pot to add to the strength. So you get percentages historically 20, 30%, good, strong, historic pot. Now you can have 50, 60%, you know, but it's not just pot, it's additives. And like any industry, Do you trust the chemist making the additives? And there have been a lot of bad batches of various things done over the years, and it's not just THC that can have a bad batch. MDMA, a wonderful party drug. If you look up the frozen people online, you'll find that back in the days there was a bad batch made, and people partied in the Bay Area and woke up the next morning unable to move. They had instantaneous advanced Parkinsonism, and they were frozen. Bad batch.
If people don't mind, I would like to go on a little bit of a run on this because I think it's so important. We don't have proof, but we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, which what Jay shared really supports. That marijuana use in adolescence is a direct path to depression or depressive disorders in early adulthood and forward for many individuals. The other thing is, Jay talked about, the upping of the THC, the additives. The other is the CBD is engineered out, and CBD has natural antipsychotic properties. So essentially you up the components, the chemical components associated with more, I would say, high experience and take away the antipsychotic. If it was going to be legalized, it should have been legalized in our grandparents' era. When it really was kind of soft, and there was an argument that it was similar to alcohol. Now, I mean, the longer I work in this, the more conservative I get. Call me a middle-aged fart, but I just see lives literally ruined.
I'm afraid I can't be called middle-aged anything anymore.
Are you an old fart?
I'm just an old fart.
Okay.
So, I don't have anything against people's personal use of things that they choose. I mean, it's their right to make their own mistakes, but they need to be aware that things aren't always benign when you find them on the street. Things are laced with things. There are overdoses on fentanyl where they didn't think they were getting fentanyl. They thought they were getting Xanax, but they die from taking what they thought was just going to be a little relaxation. So street drugs are street drugs, and on the street is buyer beware.
And let's also throw in, Jay, that the frontal lobes are not fully developed until 23. And sometimes people even say now we're looking at 26. So you're affecting the development of the frontal lobes.
Yeah.
Newsflash, newslaugh, emotional regulation or deregulation.
And that's just when they start to work. There's something called wisdom that doesn't happen then. You've just wired up the part of the brain that's going to learn it. It comes with age. Too soon old, too late smart is an old German phrase directly translated. And if you look at the EEG, people that get older start to have a slowing of the background alpha, and you go, oh, well, they're degrading. They're old and fading. But there's something that's still increasing, and that's the complexity of the EEG. And that corresponds more with the wisdom of aging. Now, the slowing of alpha is as you start to get a little fritzy with your memory, and it's not a healthy thing. So you should go to a neurofeedback specialist that can teach you how to brighten your brain and regain the slightly slowed frequencies so your memory works like it used to. The term brain brightening was coined by the seniors who experienced the speeding back up of the alpha. Your alpha is your resolution of the outside world. If it's fast enough, you have a high resolution. Things are crisp and bright. Your memory works. No tip of the tongue problem. The data is right there. So, as you age and become wiser, make sure that you're not slipping and skipping the therapy that can end up retaining your sharpness. So the neurofeedback world has a wonderful tool for all of the baby boomers like myself that are, of an age where you start to concern yourself with, gee, I forgot why I was going into the room. Am I getting senile? Am I losing my mind? And do I have the big A, Alzheimer's? Luckily, there are EEG tools that can end up predicting Alzheimer's dementia versus cognitive impairment that's mild very, very well. It's still not great at other kinds of dementia, but it's great for ruling out the big A. And you can have yourself tested and get a pretty good review as to whether there's a likelihood of cognitive failure from dementia or whether you're on the mild cognitive impairment, normal aging sort of a trajectory.
Yeah, and Gen X, aka moi, is right behind. But before Jay and I steal the show, Jessica, I think you wanted to share a few things that were coming up, and specifically in terms of how to train or get into neurotherapy. Do you want to share?
Yeah. So, one of my missions certainly is to continue to bring new clinicians into our field and help them get started with this. And I think that as a field, we're really good at offering an introduction to our field and the basics. And then I feel like there's a bit of a gap. And then there's a lot of training that's very advanced. Yeah. And there's this middle place where clinicians are kind of expected to self-guide themselves through a PhD in neurofeedback. And so I've really worked for the last 10 years at becoming a mentor to people to really get them from that gap and to really help not just with how to clinically apply neurofeedback, but how to integrate it into a practice, how to price yourself, how to advertise yourself within the ethical requirements and standards of our field, because we don't all have to keep reinventing the wheels in that way. And certainly, as Jay always says, we need to help those below us and look to those above us and kind of create that chain of learning. Yeah. And so I'm offering a webinar through Neurotraining Strategies, which is Mary Tracy's business. And so there will be an advertisement coming through her. And this is I'm not going to probably talk about anything to do with clinical neurofeedback at all. But it's really about, the back end business part of making a successful practice. And, how do you speak about this in a way that is acceptable? How do you market yourself? How do you find clients? How do you make referrals? How do you, all of those kinds of things, and just give a lot of resources and guidance to people on that.
I love it. I love it. And if I could just flash on what you said there in the middle, I think it's so true that the bare bones basics, that's being covered. And then once you're at this other level, but our whole discipline is really, really bad at bridging those two stages. And that's precisely why, where, and how these CAN programs, excuse me, come in. And as Jay said, people wearing wearable wellness devices as opposed to, little fun things to pump a little something up, but not doing that, but using those as treatment modalities. So thank you for noticing the gap and thinking, in terms of how to bridge all of our newbies. Yeah.
Eating the elephant.
Yeah.
Jessica, to move the field forward, I'd like to hear your thoughts on standardization of training and regulation, because anybody can go out there and open up a storefront with an amplifier and profess neurofeedback capabilities. And there's no downside if there's malpractice to be sanctioned. Do you think neurofeedback should be regulated? And on the standardization side, I've talked to many neurologists, and I've asked them, why don't you use more EEGs? And they tell me because not everybody is trained the same way. I don't know if it's true or not. That's just what they've told me. Is it true? And if it is, how do we correct these two things? Should we be regulated, and should there be a standardization of training on reading EEGs?
Wow. You know, that's something I think about a lot, is should we be regulated? And I don't know that I have the right answer. I don't know how I feel about it, because it's a double-edged sword. I do feel like what I can do is to help elevate my mentees' practices to be the standard that we want in this field, and to work very hard to use language and market and advertise to help consumers be able to discern who to go to, so that the language we use and the clarity with which we explain what we're doing and educate consumers is what we can do right now, that I think is really important. And I'll let Jay and Mari speak to that as well.
Informed consent and research release forms are key to proper operation of a practice. Our professional societies are not really set up for being the brain police. We don't have our field advanced and solidified enough to circle the wagons yet. So we need to be an educational source, and a source that will help with the forms to help a practice be set up properly, that sort of a thing. But standards of practice are things that are regulated by the state's licensing boards, not by BCIA or AAPB or ISNR, which are membership organizations. Now, there's some good guidance within the membership organizations as to what to do, but they shouldn't be the brain police, because quite obviously that's, it just takes one error being the brain police before you be sued for messing with somebody's practice. And the societies don't have a deep enough pocket to take one solid litigation that would cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend themselves. So get out of the brain police idea, educate people on what to do. Don't try to be the police. Leave that to the state licensing boards. And the state licensing boards are quite capable of taking care of bad actors, people practicing medicine without a license. And there are some states that are very aggressive. New York State goes after you if you apply electrical currents to the person and you don't have a medical license. So the lens devices, transcranial DC, those kinds of things, if you're not licensed properly, if you're doing it like you do in other states, you can get in trouble in New York. That their licensing boards are very aggressive. So every state ends up having the ability to control practices. Our professional societies really need to do education. And I agree, there's an educational gap between the here's how you get started and there's the end goals way over there. Good luck. It's a swamp and a minefield in between, but good luck, So it still is buyer beware, but that's the world, you know.
Yeah, I'm going to
Jesse,
jump in here in terms of, education, education, education. The problem always with regulation is who is doing the regulation and do they have the knowledge to be regulators? Again, we do not want to take away experimental practice because that is what advances the science. What we want to take away is maverick idiocy. Okay. If I could just also, maybe Pete, you could put this up, but there was a table that I put together that can really, really help to inform. And I think we need the general population informed as well as professionals informed. And this was the basis of the APA approval of biofeedback, neurofeedback as a subdiscipline of psychology. In that, I wrote up 3 tiers of practitioners and 3 tiers of equipment. Now, we've since evolved since then, but I still think it's a good base document, and maybe we could put that up for people to have a peek at.
on the business side of things, Jessica, till we get, you need differentiation. And I think the best thing that people can do right now is just ask the question, do you accept insurance for neurofeedback? Because in order to accept insurance, you need to have somebody licensed there overseeing things, right? I know you don't want to diminish anybody else's business, but that would be a good rule of thumb to figure out if somebody knows what they're doing in neurofeedback, if they can take insurance.
Potentially, but whether a clinician chooses to or is really capable of navigating insurance claims, not all people who can accept insurance claims do accept insurance claims, depending on a lot of factors. It can be very time consuming and they may not it's like for me, I'm a master's level clinician. I don't have a PhD, and that affects how much they will ever reimburse me. It doesn't matter the tens of thousands of dollars of equipment and training that I have put into neurofeedback. They just see me as an LPC, like another LPC that went through a 2 years master's program and rents an office and does talk therapy. I will get reimbursed like they will, except I have much more invested in what I'm doing expense wise. So there can be real challenges with getting reimbursement. So I don't know if that's necessarily the right gauge, in my opinion. Maybe Mari and Jay can speak to that.
Well, up here in Canada, we have kind of a half solution to that. So anybody who's a registered psychologist, PhD level, you can, neurotherapy is under the umbrella term of psychological services. It was a hard battle, but, we won it. We also have a subclassification of clinical counselors, but it doesn't solve some of the issues because exactly as you said, Jessica, yeah, I've been in this field, gosh, as I said, 25 years. I've had my BCIA since 2000. I've got all those nice little fellowship blah, blah, blahs next to my name. But for the insurance provider, none of that is, I'm going to air quote again, relevant in terms of who's being reimbursed. The individual who literally took a 3-hour workshop and put some coin down for a piece of equipment is placed in the same category. So we don't quite have it figured out. The other component, and I'm just going to really lament, is that just as you said, the amount of time we have to put into the insurance adjusters, this, that, and the other. We're actually considering just dropping it because, everybody has to make a living. And if anybody on insurance literally is taking up a minimum of 45 minutes of admin for each hour of services, I mean, you do the math, especially with our equipment costs. So it's very, very sad. But it's looking more and more that we're servicing a population that can afford and pay out of pocket, and it's becoming elitist. And that is a tragedy in itself.
For patients that have insurance, we provide a superbill that they can go to their insurance company and try to collect. However, in their signing on with us, they realize that they're responsible for the payment, and if they're declined, which is not uncommon, they're the ones who are responsible. And the insurance companies are out there with the intention of denying coverage more than anything else.
Yeah.
That's how they make their money. So don't expect the insurance company to necessarily be generous. So in Washington State, the insurance companies were sued by the parents of autistic kids for parity. You have to treat autism kind of like if there was a broken leg, you have to provide services. You can't, underserve them. So they had to provide up to $500,000 of services per year. Well, the insurance company got the legislature to then say, okay, but your doctor can't call you autistic. You have to go to a center of excellence. And they set up a series of centers of excellence that could do the diagnosis. And initially, EEG, QEGs were being declined. They wouldn't pay for that. Finally, after paying $500,000 for therapy that didn't work at all, they then relented and accepted an EEG QEG from Greg Charbonneau, one of the centers of excellence. And he identified epileptiform content. They got a medication prescribed. Click. The anticonvulsant basically took care of the over 60% of the autism population that have epileptiform content, and he got better. At this point, anytime he wants to do an EEG, QEG, they approve it because they see positive outcome.
Jessica, on the business end, on the marketing side, what I'm seeing, since there's no regulation, you have people who have deep pockets that go out there and advertise and put out fear, uncertainty, and doubt to put somebody else down to make them look better. How do you market your services so that you can show that you're different from somebody else's without putting down somebody else? Because Jay has this theory of coopetition. If we want to grow this field, everybody's got to pitch in and help everybody out. But in the real business world, one business would like to see the other business die so they could grow. How do you teach that? How do you teach marketing to your new clients? And then we'll wrap up.
So for my mentees, my clinician mentees, I talk a lot about, personalizing how they are presenting themselves to a regional market. So most of the people I'm working with are sole proprietors. They're not running big clinics. So really talking about this, having pictures of your office and yourself rather than stock photography, having regional, Google AdWords so that people can find you more easily, obviously search engine optimization, but really helping people to see who you are and what your space is like, especially for me working with traumatized people, that makes them already feel safe. And then really holding yourself, knowing what the standards are and the recommendations in our field for the language that we use around what we do, and being very clear to help people to just know what you're offering, and emphasize the aspects of your practice that are at a gold standard. You don't have to say anything about what anybody else is doing, but you can definitely emphasize what you are doing and how that's important.
Yeah. If you point to the standards, then the other people out there, the person looking around will ask them, do you meet that standard as well? So you don't have to snipe at somebody else's standards. You can promote yours. Mm-hmm. There are franchise operations that basically are doing the general health and wellness type device that are trying to saturate markets, and you don't have to be a therapist to run the office. And again, these are the kinds of things that state licensing boards will finally address. But luckily, the franchises are so badly run that the franchisees are suing the franchise company. And if you go online, you'll see, all that litigation. And the litigation company changed its franchise basic name a couple of different times now, but they're still doing the same trick, they'll give you a big spreadsheet that shows you can make a fortune keeping the seat filled with people. And, life doesn't work that way. And anyway, it's still a buyer beware world out there, and entering the field of neurofeedback is still a buyer beware. You've got to be careful what equipment and what group you're affiliating with and so forth. It can change or limit or optimize your outcome. So,
Jessica, where do we point people in Virginia that want to come out for care, or people that would like to get some consulting knowledge from you? Where do we point them, Jessica?
Sure. Well, my clinic is the Virginia Center for Neurofeedback, Attachment, and Trauma. So our website is virginianeurofeedback.com, all spelled out. So clients who are interested in receiving care can go there. JessicaEure.com is my mentoring. I wanted to go with your mentoring, but I decided to tame it down. It's just JessicaEure.com. And that has information about my mentoring services. And I am getting ready to start a new cohort in the fall of mentees. And I love my setup because any questions I can't answer, then I elevate to Mary Tracy, Ron Swatsina, Jay Gunkelman, and we have our chain. So I really like that. And a lot of times mentees will feel more comfortable asking questions of someone who isn't, honestly, Jay, at your level. They may feel a little intimidated to ask a question they feel like is too simple. And so I really like to create an atmosphere where my mentees can just ask me anything. There's no stupid question. And I know you have that attitude as well, but your reputation sometimes precedes you a little.
Yeah, Jay.
Yeah, I mean, what?
No, just that they don't want to see what I get is a lot. They don't want to seem stupid.
I know.
People don't
the
like
only
candor.
Stupid question I get is, Jay, would you like to look at this data? Of course I want to look at the data.
The raw data.
This is exactly like Barry Sturman saying, show me the data. He really meant it. Now I'm a crazy old guy, but I'm approachable. I'm more than happy to discuss pretty much anything with anybody. So
you are, but you're also very busy and still in retirement. And, getting an audience with you may not be the easiest. So
just getting a scheduled date with me is difficult at this point. So
Jessica Eure.
Also, may I make one more plug before we end?
Go.
So I am speaking at the Suisun Summit this October on neuromarkers in autism. So we'll be, when I did an analysis of my clients, I was kind of surprised to find that my most common client is basically an 8-year-old autistic boy. And I really enjoy working with them, and I have learned a lot from them. And also, this is sort of a review of all of the neuromarkers that Jay has identified, and specifically those that we find more commonly in autism.
Jessica Eure, Jay Gunkelman, Dr. Marie Swingle, wherever you are, another great episode of the NeuroNoodle Neurofeedback Podcast. Have a great weekend, all.
It's good to see a little promo for this Suisun Summit, and it'll be a 3-day solid EEG meeting with good presentations, but lots of fun. And I look forward to seeing you there, Jessica.
3-day party, beer. Let's go. Bye, guys. The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.